veterans, ladies and gentlemen, my privilege and the college staff. It's very nice to be with you all today. I was asked to talk about infantry in World War II. And I used to give talks with history and statistics and whatnot, but every once in a while somebody would say, you saw combat, infantry combat. Can you tell us how it was for you? So I don't have a great deal of time, so I'm just going to tell you about one battle where I was wounded and captured and escaped 15 minutes later. All the publicity said I was a POW, but I was only a POW for about 15 minutes. I first started combat on the Anzio beachhead, and that was a very difficult place to start fighting. And my first combat was on the breakout, and we entered Rome 12 days later. My division had 3,300 killed and wounded in 12 days, which is a lot of fighting. We occupied Rome for a couple of weeks and went down to Naples and practiced for the landing of southern France. And I was the squad leader. Actually, on Anzio, on that first, I was assistant squad leader. 4 days later, I was an acting platoon leader. That's how many casualties. Five of the six of our officers were killed or wounded in that time. And so now we landed on August 15th in southern France. And I was about to be in the squad leader. It was an easy landing. We had casualties. I had a man killed and 3 wounded in the first hour, but the Germans didn't put up much of a fight in southern France. And on D+2, this German 19th Army, which is a big army, 170,000 men, and maybe some women, I don't know, but they were asked to retreat. So we followed them up towards the Rhine River. We went 400 miles in 1 month, fighting a lot of rear guard. We got to the Rhine River at Strasbourg, and we were the first American division to reach the Rhine River. And so, gosh, we'd been living in foxholes for 2.5, 3 months, eating canned rations, no hot meals. Finally, we get to Strasbourg and we have a break. We didn't have to dig a foxhole, we had our kitchen, and we thought, oh, this is wonderful. But it only lasted, we thought we'd have Christmas dinner there, but it only lasted on the 19th of December. We were loaded, we had to strike camp and load up in trucks and go down towards Colmar. And the last French soil the Germans occupied was the Colmar pocket. It was about 200 miles, oh no, it's about 100 miles long and 30, 45 miles wide. And the French army and some of American divisions were trying hard to eliminate the Germans there. And the 36th Division took a real beating there. And so we relieved them on the 19th of May. And then on the 23rd, we had to go to attack a town. My company was asked to attack this town of Danville. And the 36th Division had fought 2.5 weeks for it, and they couldn't capture it. They destroyed every building with their artillery and mortars and whatnot. The only buildings left in that town standing were 3 houses. And the only 3 pre-war buildings in that town are 3 houses. The church, the convent, the schools, city hall, wineries, everything was destroyed by the 36th Division. And so we had to take on the Germans in that town. So on the 23rd of December of 44, we reached our line of departure. We had to tack down through a vineyard. We had 4 tanks leading us, and a wonderful lieutenant in charge in front of one platoon, and I was in front of another, and then another platoon followed me. We went down through this vineyard, and my God, the German artillery was just giving us holy heck. And then, of course, I'm hoping artillery was doing the same at the other end. But we finally reached the edge of that town, and all 4 tanks were knocked out just that quick, German tanks and Panzerfaust. And so we went around the tanks, carrying some of our wounded, and the best we could. And there's some Germans in some dugouts. We kept them in the ditch. We fired at them, but they didn't come out of the ditch, and we just moved through into the center and got into the town. We got into a house, a courtyard. And of course, the French farmers all come into town, and then they go out and do the day. So there's a pretty wide entrance there. The house, everything above the floor was gone. But the cellar was nice and big, so we put our wounded in there, and then the rest of us got on the wall around the courtyard. And I looked over the wall, and my gosh, there was about 30 Germans around an officer or a sergeant, I don't know which. And then there was a German right on the other side of the wall, about 6, 8 feet from me. So I ducked back down, and I took a hand grenade, and I was in an implement shed, and all the roof was gone except a few rafters. I threw that darn hand grenade, and my God, it hit a rafter over my head and fell on the other side of the fence. Yeah, you know, combat, just one lucky thing after another, and I could name a million times I was so darn lucky. But anyway, so I looked over, and those guys all scattered. So they attacked us. The Germans had a SS battalion, or SS people that captured me. They just used them for counterattacks, which is very unique. We'd probably used, I never had to defend ourselves after losing ground, but I'm sure we'd have had to be the counterattackers. But so these people, so we fought them off for about an hour and a half, and then a German tank, a Mark IV tank, came up to the gate, to the entrance of this courtyard and stopped. And oh boy, you know, it's pretty bad. And then it went on, and then it backed up. And the guys started turning those darn tanks, the treads. Came into the courtyard, and it was only 50, 60 feet away from the cellar entrance. And started to fire. Well, on the second round, something hit me in the side of the face. I think it was a piece of the cellar, but it knocked out all these teeth and some of these teeth and cut me up quite a bit inside of my mouth mostly. So now I was wounded, and the German infantry are going to be right behind that tank, and they'll throw hand grenades in that cellar or shoot in there. So we had to really surrender. There were only 11 of us left, and 6 of us were wounded. And so we had 2 wounded Germans in the cellar that attacked the cellar. And so we were giving them bandages and cigarettes, treating them pretty good. And I told them, my lieutenant was almost dead. He died quite shortly after we were captured. But so I was in command. So I told the two Germans to yell out that we'd surrender. So we did. 5 wounded men were helped by 5 unwounded men. So the 10 of them came out of the cellar, and then I followed them. I was the 11th one. And so they first looked for weapons. I had a Luger. I carried a Luger in a shoulder holster for months and months, but you don't want to get captured with German weapon on you, so I'd throw it away, and it's probably still in that cellar someplace. But so a German private led us out of the courtyard, and then the 10 men, and then I was back, and then a German corporal. It was an American carbine. I never thought much of a carbine, but here he's carrying an American carbine, which surprised me. But anyway, so now we're on the main street, and I have my hands up like this, and shells are coming a little bit, and gosh, he came up and touched me on the left shoulder, and I turned and hit him on the chin. I saw he had about 2 or 3 days or weeks, I don't know how long, he had red whiskers. I didn't see him hit the ground, but I just turned and got off into this rubble. And those buildings that had been attacked, there'd be no way I could do this, but they're just nothing but destructive buildings. So I got up into the rubble, and I worked my way back to kind of the way we came in. And then I got onto another street that we'd been on, and I hugging the walls at the edge of the street, and went a little ways, 100 yards or so, and 2 men from the 2nd platoon waved me into a house. And they couldn't believe I walked up that darn street. They'd been shooting at Germans in a winery and a couple of houses all morning. So you can see life in infantry is just one lucky thing after another, really, to tell you the truth. So now I was liberated and reported to my company commander, and then went to an aid station and got, morphine and the fluids. Taken to an evacuation hospital about 40 miles away. Next morning they operated on me, and my guy, my BAR man from my platoon was on the table next to me. There's quite a few wounded, and they have several tables in these operatories. So the guy right next to me was wounded in the same battle I was. So then I was sent to Rome, to Paris for 5 days in a big hospital. And then I have no recollection of going to England. But I was sent to Birkenhead, which is right across the bay from Liverpool, and I was in a hospital there for a couple of months. But and they must have been on a train and in a train ferry, but I absolutely have no memory of that trip from Paris to England. So then I got a week's leave and then to go back to the front lines. Now the American Army was in the middle of Germany. The war was over in in a month and a half. You didn't want to get killed in the last month and a half, I'll tell you. And so we had some hard fighting. We had a 4.5-day battle for Nuremberg. But then when Nuremberg was captured, I was the company commander. I mean, the colonel, my regimental commander called me into his CP, and he said, "Sergeant," he said, "we're thinking of giving you a battlefield commission." He said, "but I've got a couple of questions." And so the first one I don't remember, but the second one was, he said, "Now you're an officer in the 3rd Division, and you're going down the streets of Paris, and you see a 3rd Division soldier drunk and disorderly and disgracing the army and the division. What would you do as an officer in this division?" And I said, "Colonel," I said, "I know the answer you want, but I said, I probably wouldn't do anything." He looked at me. He couldn't fault me on honesty, and so I got the commission, and then the war was over shortly after that. So I tell people that wound on the 23rd of December, I got out of 3 months of combat, I got out a lot of hard winter fighting, and I could have been killed any day in that 3 months. So I tell people that the best Christmas present I ever had was that wound on December 23rd, 1944.